Hello, all. Our room here is filling up. It's pretty exciting. We are going to have a great presentation here today. I think I'll start in the next couple of minutes. We still have some people coming on, and while we're doing that, I'll briefly introduce who we have on board here, and then we will circle back and do it again right before we start. I'm very excited that you guys are on here. This is one of many webinars that we will be doing throughout the year. We plan on doing weekly webinars on a myriad of different topics. One of our clients have been asking for the most is one that our clients have been asking the most on is SQF stuff. So we made that our first one. So that's what we have right now. Still getting people on board here. Let's see. I think I'll share the presentation. And then we'll get started. If anybody wants to ask questions, you can do so in the chat bar, and that will come to me. And then we'll hold the questions till the end, and there'll be some time for Q&A, and we'll ask those questions at the very end. People are still on board. We have about, I don't know, we've had like 3 people log in here just in the last 30 seconds. So we'll let that keep going, and let's see. Share the presentation here. Okay. Oh, yep, we've had 2 more people come on board here. So we'll give it just 1 more minute, and then we will start again. Hi, everybody. We are going to start now because been going through this presentation with the presenters, Darryle and Robert or Rob, and it is going to take a lot of time. There is a ton of information. It is jam-packed full of info here. How it's going to work is I'm going to quickly introduce Darryle and Rob. They're going to kind of go through quickly what it is that they do. Just spend a couple minutes, and then they're going to launch into the content of the biggest challenges and changes that you're going to face when implementing a transition from SQF version 7.2 to 8.0. Rob and Darryle have been working with multitudes of different companies in the transitions, and so one of the things I wanted them to do was share stories as well. So Darryle is going to be talking about some of the high-level stuff, and Rob's going to really dive deep into some different stories on how they've implemented some of these major changes within the last, I don't know, 6 months to a year. So we will dive in now. And so, Darryle, I'm going to transfer it over to you and to Rob. And I'm going to put myself on mute. And I'm going to collect these questions that are coming up. Guys, I said in the very, very beginning, there's a chat section. I'll be able to see that. If you have any questions questions as we're going, just go ahead and type them into the chat section, and we will ask those questions, as many of them as we can get to by the end of the presentation. It looks like we have a pretty full house here, guys. So we are going to begin. Go ahead, Darryle and Rob.
Matt. Thanks, Matt. All right, I'll start out. Thanks, Matt. First of all, I want to just let everybody know thank you for having us today. I'm going to give you my background real briefly and then tell you that we're going to show some slides, but I probably won't stick to the slides. I'm a rebel. I like to go off them a little bit. But I think the key to this whole thing, what we're trying to do today for you, is give you real life what we see on the ground level. And that's uniquely different than just a training session where we're reading slides to you. You can get those on the SQF website, but can you get real life? The rubber meets the road, the boots meet the floor, how it works. And that's what we're here to do today. So hopefully you find it enlightening and fun. It's hard to make this fun, but we'll do our best to do that. My background is over 7 years in the SQF world as a consultant and auditor. My company does the audits through WQS. We also have a software package that we use to consult that we'll show at the end if anybody's interested in seeing that. But the bigger picture is what we do well is we take the real life code and we stick to it and help people make it doable and they are able to apply it. And keep in mind too that I stick by the code, not by the guidance document. Keep that in mind. If you're reading that guidance document, that is not the physical code. It helps you, but please focus on the actual code. Okay, Rob, go to the next slide. I went over this already. Everything's under one umbrella is what we do. Okay. Let's talk a little about our company over the years. I already kind of went over it. We were founded as a consulting group and then migrated into auditing and software. Again, keep to the next one. I already covered that. I told you I won't stick by slides. I'm a rebel. Okay, let's talk about SQF. I took the top ones that I find are challenging. Now, we have a lot of produce companies on this. Keep in mind, as I talk about management review, I'm going to talk about the PARC doctrine. That's part of the FSMA thing that we're going to talk about. Management has got to be accountable now through the government. So let's jump right into management review first. Management review. Well, everybody, this is now monthly. This is no longer something you can just put together once before the audit. It has to show throughout the year that your team is committed. Now, from an SQF practitioner, I'm sure you all challenged with getting everybody in a room and getting everybody to buy into it. Well, I'm going to tell you a shortcut to do that. Walk up to the owner, walk up to the VPs and tell them FSMA, they're the ones that will go to jail, not you. They will go to jail. And negligence are not doing their part and not knowing they will go to jail. It's PARC doctrine says that for produce. It means if you knew about it or whether you didn't know about it, you're negligent, you are accountable. So that's how you get the eyeballs to open up and everybody at the table starts to want to listen and the phones are put down. So start out your management review on a monthly basis and start out with reminding them, turn your phones off, and everybody in this room is accountable. It's not just the QA manager or the compliance officer, it's everybody. So what we recommend is you get a form together, you put down all the programs that are tied into management review. I think you all know those. You've got your customer complaints, your HACCP, your continuous improvement, your FSMA, and what you do is you discuss what you do about it, a before and after. So the previous meeting, did you conquer those and move on, or do you have new ones? Now, what is management review? It's where the information goes from the top to the bottom. Think about it. It's where you made a message, management bought into it, and the floor people get it. How do you prove it? You got to document it. So you have a document, you make a storyline for the auditor, and you can put all those programs, the corrective action that you did, the customer complaints, and you make a nice storybook. You've just answered a ton of questions for the audit up front. It shows your programs are there. It shows they're linked. You're communicating. The key is to get management involved. Keep in mind, use that line about the prison thing, and it usually wakes up upper management pretty heavily. And it's in the news. You can look at the recalls. People are going to jail. It's not something I'm just making up, though. You know, I try not to scare people too much, but you really got to get them involved. All right, and you got to have that storyline. So I like a nice book for the auditor to show all the programs that went through the management review, right? You get stories, and then you get the people to sign it. There's your commitment from top to bottom. And the employees tell you what they feel, and you do something about it, and you get that continuous loop of communication. That's truly, guys, what management review is. I think a lot of people miss that. It's not just you showing charts or whatever. It's where management has said something, and the floor understood it, and the floor gave their opinion back and management, and you continue to have that loop of communication. All right, so we'll take questions at the end, but this is the crust of SQF. If you don't have management buy-in, you're going to fail, or you're just going through the motions with an auditor that obviously isn't testing it. Well, shame on them, because this is really where the rubber meets the road. You've got to be committed. Okay, so I can't, I can tell you I audit quite a bit. And when I see people just snowballing me, I just light them up, because if management isn't buying into it, the systems didn't work. Okay, next slide. Environmental monitoring. Okay, this is a big one. This is now a requirement. You have to do it from a FSMA standpoint, from a GFSI standpoint. Now, I know a lot of you say, well, Darryle, what does that mean? Well, it's based on your company, what you make. It's based on your risk assessments of the building. So you do zones 2, 3, and 4 for your pathogens, and normally for your food contact, you would do non-pathogen, right? The idea here is to establish a system that checks it, not once a year. That doesn't tell me anything. Check the building more often. I can't answer this on this call. What your frequency is based off not knowing what your product is. Is it high risk? Is it low risk? Are you a packaging company? That's different if you've got baby formula or you're cooking meat or whatever you're doing. You have to have an environmental program. Now, a lot of people get caught up in the ATP. I don't want to get in a huge discussion, but make sure you're doing third-party accredited pathogen testing. That tells me what's growing in the building. You have to also validate anything that you're doing in-house with a third-party lab. Make sure the lab has got accreditations. Check that, challenge them, go on their website. Make sure you're doing this properly. I've seen it where people do not test. Now, the big question you have for me is probably, well, what if we find something, we panic? Keep in mind, you want to find something. If you have me come in there, I'm going to find something. We want to find it. The idea is how'd you kill it and how'd you control it? Because they're there. They're in your drains. They're somewhere in that building, I promise you. And hiding them or telling you that you cherry-picked it doesn't really help us go to the next level. Environmental monitoring and upper management needs to understand this is about finding it and how you killed it. And do you have the right chemicals? Are you rotating your chemicals out? So the idea is to find it. Establish those zones. Again, have a nice procedure, how you do something if it does come back positive. Be careful with presumptives. I've seen companies that get a presumptive and they go crazy and call everybody and it fell off. So be real cognizant of presumptive results. Okay. So environmental monitoring in a nutshell, you have to do it. So
quick question on that. What's the major difference do you see between environmental monitoring in 7.2 and environmental monitoring in
it was in module 11, Matt, so they didn't have to really do it, and they could kind of get around it and just say, well, we just test this or test some products. It's now mandatory, and it's mandatory through FSMA. So they really have to have a program and prove that it meets their building. If it's older building, you know what I mean? You get challenges. It's hard to explain the frequency because I don't know their building, I don't know their product runs. But when you get those two, this is now mandatory. And Matt, in the past, they could get away with using podunk little labs. You've got to have accreditation labs. They must be accredited. And it changes the ballgame.
Listeria becomes really important, right? I mean, we keep hearing listeria. And environmental monitoring, are you seeing with your client listeria being one of the top things that they're testing for?
Listeria from a building standpoint, absolutely. Drains, it comes in from the outside. Again, the key to this is you're going to find it. It's how you handle it. So I think, Matt, one of the biggest challenges is changing the upper management to understand it's okay to find it. We're getting phone calls and upper management screaming at the QA manager for finding it. That's okay. They've got to get past that paradigm of the past. We don't want it. No, you want to know where it is. That's how you kill it and contain it. You know what I mean? You got to find the virus.
The management review side is too, right? If the management is in and really want to make sure their facility is as safe as possible, then they're going to be really behind this environmental monitoring.
Yeah, absolutely. They've got it. Management has to buy into it. And all of these programs now have to have management buy-in. That's the key to this whole thing. And how do you get that?
I have, I'm sure you do as well, that do a combo of internal testing. They get their own PCR machines, or at least a PCR machine.
Yep.
And then they do, like third-party validation of, occasionally testing stuff. Are you seeing that a lot clients? Are you seeing?
I'm seeing it go back and forth now. A lot of people are getting away from the ATP, getting away from in-house because it puts a risk on. Remember what you can bring into court. You got to be careful with that. If you do have an issue, you've got to have third-party accredited, ISO tested, because if you don't, you can't stand it up in court. You know what I mean? So I am seeing some companies pull away from it and do more targeting monitoring rather than just every lot. They're doing more sensible environmental testing, if that makes sense. They're targeting it better now. They're educating themselves on what to test.
Got it.
More is not better. More is not better. I can't say that enough in this presentation. Just because you're doing it doesn't mean you're doing it right? So you've got to ask yourself if it really is effective.
And what do you see as some of the most effective? I know it's going to be different in different facilities, but on an average basis, what are you seeing is the most effective? Testing the lines, testing the drains, that type of stuff?
The drains and the doorways. And what we're finding a lot of times is they'll find it and they realize that they weren't cleaning right to begin with. So it's a good test of your cleaning. If you get a positive, it's fine. You branch it out, you see how far it went, and then you clean it with your chemicals, and they're finding out their chemicals weren't the right chemicals. So it's an eye-opener for a lot of people to say, oh my gosh, all this time we've been doing the wrong procedures or the wrong cleaning chemicals. So this is a big eye-opener for a lot of companies. If you do it properly. You know what I mean? If you're just cherry picking, it's not going to work.
Yeah, well, this is a huge change in SQF, the environment.
And I will tell you from experience for everybody on this call, I have a very good relationship with the FDA. I wrote their exam 3-4 years ago for the food safety professional. When they come in, I'd rather have you all do it and find a positive and clean it than then come in and find a positive. Because let me tell you, they don't just do one drain. They do the whole building with thousands of swabs. And when they're done, you're down for a while. So, I mean, you've got to think it carefully, do it right from the beginning, and that avoids the problems down the road. It's like if you don't feeling well, go to the doctor and get it now. Don't wait until it turns into something much bigger. That makes sense?
Very cool. Very cool. Great. All right. Well, and then one previous question too, and we have a lot of time, so I just wanted to
go ahead.
The frequency of the management review. What is the biggest change you're seeing in this? In the management review between the two? Because I know management review before. What's the biggest?
It's a little bit enhancement. They call it an enhancement. If you ask SQF, they'll say they've enhanced it. It's now monthly rather than annual. So think about it. You can have an audit in June. If you did your management review in August, you mean to tell me you did nothing with management from August to next June? Now it's monthly. But what they're looking at is the content and follow through, Matt. That the communication portal is working between management and the people on the floor. That's the challenge. So monthly, and are you really doing it properly? Not just you're walking in a room, people are zoned out playing on their cell phones. Are they really paying attention? Are they competent when they leave the room?
Got it. And are you seeing, with the outbreaks that are happening, you work with a ton of different clients, and you work with them differently than we do, right? As a certification body, we people are showing their best light. As a consultant, are you seeing a lot more companies in the management going, hey, you know what, we really need to do this. It's no joke. And seeing more management buy-in?
Yeah, I'll tell you what happens. I'll give you a 1 minute good round table on this one. So I'll walk in a room. It's the same old for 25 years, or when Dad started the company 30 years ago, the same attitude. No one's in the room. And I'm sitting there with the QA manager. I'm like, where's your management when we're doing this? So I start out with I call it an SQFism, like an exorism. Like you do it with the exorcism, I do an SQFism. I basically pull management in there. They're pissed. They're standing in there. Their phones are going off. And I said, guys, I'm telling you, women, whatever, folks, you're going to get accountable and go to jail if you don't listen to me right now. You see how fast, Matt, they drop those phones like a microphone bomb drop. They just drop them. They're so scared at that moment. They want to know what I'm talking about. And after I explain FSMA, their eyeballs come out and they say, okay, let's have this meeting. So you've got to get their attention. You have to change that paradigm, that culture. And that's a challenging one. And it's hard to be a prophet in your own land. You would agree. QA managers or compliance officers, they've been doing it. People just see them every day. You know what I mean? It's a challenge. So I go in and really wake them up. I jar them all loose. So it works.
Very good, very good. And it's interesting. I'm hearing a lot of people, a lot of companies that are pretty confused about the FSMA stuff. I know you're going to follow that in the last slide. But are
Yep.
you management and in some of these companies don't even really know whether preventive controls affects them or not? Or do you see more people, everybody going like, oh yeah, it affects us, and we got to get
Everybody's pretty much aware of it. What they've done is spend a lot of time in the wrong direction, and I can't tell you how many times that just concerns me. We'll go on site and realize for 6 months they trusted someone that thought they knew what they're doing, or the person really genuinely wanted to do the right thing, but those courses are just mundane, right? They're just reading slides, they're bulldozing it right down. There's a way to really look at that information, understand it, and that's what we do. But I mean, what you need to do is find a way to really understand it, and then it becomes really applicable and it becomes fruitful. It's useful at that point when you understand it.
Perfect. Okay. We'll move on because you'll talk about that more in detail.
Yeah, we're going to be into that later. So
yeah.
Food fraud. Rob, did you want to handle this one, or do you want me to do it?
Whatever you'd like, Darryl. Either I can go if you want to start it out, and then I can.
Let me start it out. Rob has some experience in this one. Let me start it out. Food fraud is really interesting. So EMA was the technical term that the FDA used, economically motivated adulteration. It's migrating back to food fraud. Let's get down to the nitty gritty on this one. What is it? I mean, food fraud, people think, well, it's when I buy something that isn't what I paid for. You're exactly right. It also can harm you if it's done wrong. And it can start with your supplier. So if you buy junk or whatever you want to call it, and you get the wrong stuff, whether you know it or not, and you push it through your system and the wrong stuff comes out the other end. Or you buy the right materials and you got a disgruntled employee, or your management team is trying to cut corners and streamline it and save some money. Either way, people must get what they paid for, and they cannot be at risk when they're consuming your products. So this is now an FDA requirement for FSMA. It's also GFSI. You start with your internal and external factors. So your internals are your company, disgruntled employees, management making shortcuts, and then you've got overusage and you're trying to sell it. And then the external is just opposite. It's your suppliers are cutting corners. So food fraud is a big deal. How do you do it? Well, you start with your raw material vulnerability check on your assessment, and then you put it in your HACCP program. We built it, Matt. We built this right through our HACCP. So chemical, physical, biological, allergen, and food fraud and quality. We call those all, each line item, one that we test. So food fraud is all the way through. You could food fraud in the middle of your process if you decide to turn off a feeder or depositor if you want. So that's really, I'm going to let Rob talk about some scenarios that he's seen, but your approved suppliers is a big piece of this.
Great, thank you, Darryl. Yeah, I just wanted to go over a few, common raw materials that people see or out in the industry that are common for food fraud, either whether you're producing them or you're bringing them in. We have to look out for when you're screening your approved suppliers and making sure you're getting the correct spec sheets, and you want to know where the raw material is coming from, which country, who your distributor is getting it from, and where your distributor purchases through. The next is oil, especially extra virgin olive oil. That's usually blended with a cheaper seed oil or non-extra virgin olive oil. And by taste, look, appearance, it's almost impossible to be able to judge whether it's actually extra virgin olive oil, which you should be paying for and which you should be getting and putting into your product, as opposed to being mixed with 50% extra virgin olive oil and maybe 50% of a seed oil. And not knowing that and using it and calling it extra virgin is almost like unintentional food fraud within your manufacturing plant. So you're using it and you're calling it one thing, and you're not screening your suppliers properly, which then makes you in the middle between, I didn't know and I didn't do my diligence to find out for sure what I was actually purchasing.
Rob, hold on one second. Some people say they lost sound here. Let's see. Can you guys hear me right now?
Yes.
All right. Well, let's see. You could hear me, but other people can't. Oh man, that's not good.
I can hear you fine, Matt.
I know it, but all the attendees can't. Oh no. Oh, it looks like. Oh, you know what? It looks like they have to click reconnect at the top.
Rob, can you say that so they can hear you? They're hearing Rob, right? Can they hear Rob?
No, there something happened where a bunch of people got disconnected from the audio. So you just have to click reconnect. All right, let's see. All right, so we're getting audio back. Okay, cool. All right, so I think it was around the honey that we started losing people. So if you could, that was very, very fascinating. So the honey is a huge on food fraud, and it's because it's more expensive than. So how are people fixing that? If are they doing a test for high fructose corn syrup, or how are they doing that?
There's some really easy tests, even with viscosity or a water test, how it dissolves. There's a lot of little easy peasy tests that they can do, but yes, they're doing in-house checks now to prove the honey is legit.
And Darryle, labs are cracking down on different substitutes they might be using, and they're able to find out the source of what the substitute could be. Because usually from like Asia, if your distributor's purchasing the honey from Asia, I think a few years ago they produced 10 times more honey than they had bees. So everyone was wondering, what's going on? How are we getting so much honey? And it's physically impossible to produce that much honey. So a lot of labs in the United States were creating, different tests to be able to differentiate what's real and what's not by testing, like you said, the viscosity of the product. So you could also send it to a third-party lab if you think that there could be some fraudulent activity going on from who you're purchasing from.
Got it. And so what are so beyond the honey, what are the other things that you're seeing?
Extra virgin olive oil. If you're purchasing extra virgin, the manufacturer is often blending it with like a cheaper seed oil or a non-extra virgin olive oil, which both are a lot cheaper than the actual extra virgin olive oil. It's almost impossible to tell the difference between the two by taste, appearance, consistency. It will look the exact same. So that's definitely a lot of manufacturers use that type of product in their production. A way to do that outside of testing is to audit your suppliers. Be diligent with the spec sheets you receive. Be diligent with the C of A's you receive from your distributors, or if you're purchasing direct through an oil manufacturer. That will take me to my next point, actually, is how a lot of people ask, how do you combat food fraud? Well, I don't know. I just, I order a product and I have the faith in my distributor to send me the correct product. Well, at this point in 2018, that's really honestly not enough. A few ways to do it is to actually audit your approved suppliers. So this circles back to approved suppliers, where you can actually send out, put together some type of form where you ask your suppliers a series of questions. And a few examples of questions could be, do they have a good reputation? This is a question you can ask yourself. Were they ever at the center of a food fraud investigation at any point since they've been in business? What country do they operate in? Are they in the United States, or do they operate overseas? If they are a distributor, where do they purchase the ingredients from? Where are you getting, stuff like rice flour, corn, oil, honey? Where is this coming from? It's a higher risk if it's coming from overseas, and there's different legislation laws on how they manufacture their raw materials. So it's good to know exactly where it's coming from and know the legislation from that specific country of origin. The next one you want to ask yourself is, are they a new supplier, or do you have some type of long-term relationship with them? If they're new, you definitely want to screen them a little bit better as opposed to just ordering because you're in a bind. You could do that. The code doesn't shy against you, 911 ordering from a different supplier, as long as you get the proper documentation before you take that order in, whether it's a third-party audit, SQF, GMP, whether it's you actually physically going to their facility and auditing them if they don't have that third-party audit. There's a lot of factors within that you can actually screen them and get the proper documentation. That brings me to my next point. Are they giving you the required documentation? If you have some type of system in place where you send out automatic pings for every time you get a new lot of any specific ingredient, you want to make sure you're getting a new C of A for that specific ingredient, so you can make sure it matches to what you're putting on your label. If they send you a different brand, is it the same specs as the original brand that you were bringing in? So those are all the things. It's a lot of screening, ingredients, sub-ingredients that you have to look at when you're bringing in any of these products. And then going back to when I was talking about the honey and oil, are the ingredients you're buying high risk? Are they ingredients that can be easily manipulated for economical gain? And are you doing it for your economical gain, or are you purchasing it because someone else is doing it for theirs? So there's two different ways that could happen. You could bring it in unintentionally, or you could actually order it, knowing that you'll save and have economical gain from it. And then the other one is identity preserved. That's the big one, where you purchase an ingredient that could be organic or it could be non-GMO. And then, at some point during your production run, your supplier's out of organic and you decide to use a non-organic product. That's also considered food fraud, because on your label you're stating organic. So whatever your identity preserved is, you have to stick to that no matter what, not just to get the product out the door. The other ways to do this is, as Darryle mentioned earlier, during the food fraud, was in your HACCP plan. That's the way we urge people to, check on how you're monitoring from receiving to shipping and everything in between, how you're monitoring what's going into your product. What are your purchasing, receiving, and storage procedures? What do you tell how well does your purchasing agent know what's going into your product? Are they screening the ingredients before they order them? If they find out it's a different brand, are they getting a spec sheet to make you aware that it's a different brand but the same specs? Do you have policies in place to prevent food fraud at each step in your flow process? Because it could happen at any point. It could happen at receiving, and then it goes into storage, then it goes into production. And at that point, once it goes into production, it's okay as long as you catch it before it goes out, to QA release. And you have a good label approval, review of spec, and release program, as I just touched on. You can, like I said, you can manufacture it unknowingly and find out before release. And if it was unintentional, identify it, put it on hold, and figure out where the issue was within your process flow, and how you can fix that problem.
Another thing I think is location fraud. So it could be the true product. It's just not where they said it was. Have you been seeing that?
Sorry, you broke up a little bit, Matt. Can you say that one more time?
Yeah, so not just food fraud in the ingredients or the genetics, but also we see food fraud in location, where they're claiming the product came from one location when it really came from somewhere else.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if someone's asking you the country of origin of where, you mean the products that were produced. So if I produce a product in a different location, is that what you mean by that?
Or the raw materials.
Oh yeah, that's why you always want to know. The code specifically states now that if you purchase from overseas, you have to have a copy and be knowledgeable on that legislation for wherever you're purchasing that ingredient from. So you have to know exactly what they consider allergens, because every region, every country has different allergen legislation. So before you go and purchase that, you need to know what they consider an allergen, so you know what you're bringing in. It might not have that allergen statement on it. So that's why going back to where it's produced is very important, because like I said, if you're especially direct from overseas, you need to know everything that goes into what they have to follow on a day-to-day basis per regulatory requirements.
Very good. All right, so on the next one here, great. So Darryle and Rob, you want to tell us about what are some of the changes in the allergen management from 7.2 to 8.0?
Rob, you want to do this one? I'll do the last one.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So a few of the changes with the allergen management were they really wanted to crack down on the segregation of not only when you receive a product But when you store a product, when you produce it, how are you doing changeovers? How are you verifying that once you're running one product with egg in it and you're running one product with no egg in it? There's two ways to go about that. Whether you run the product with no egg first, then run the product with egg second, which wouldn't require any cleaning. But if you can't do that, the best way to be able to combat that is to do specific allergen swabbing at a frequency you deem by risk. So if you're running these products back to back or within the next day, you can swab it for specific allergens and ensure that your sanitation procedures are actually working. I recommend all my customers that have more than 2-3 allergens that they work with that aren't in every product, that they absolutely swab at least the hoppers, the bowls, however you're blending any type of ingredient you manufacture. You want to make sure that those areas are clean and free of allergens. You could do that monthly. It doesn't have to be done after every single clean, but if you do it monthly, that you're at least verifying that you're not getting any positive hits. You're at least verifying that your cleaning practices are now, they're sufficient and they're working. Then you could also send one of those swabs out to a third party for validation annually as well. Make sure that, you could be doing it wrong. That's the way people would think, is that maybe you haven't had any positive, so maybe there's something wrong. Maybe you're not doing it correctly. You send it out to that third party lab for validation. That validates what you do. So you verify what you do in-house and the third party will validate that for you. Then the other thing is they want you to map out where you're going to store your allergens. So they want to have it on a map where you're not going to put allergens on the east corner of the building. You're not going to put it on. It has to be in the same spot every time, so that when you receive a specific allergen, you want to make sure that it's going in the exact same spot all the time, and it's being pulled, and people know where it is. Your production team, your shipping and receiving team, they know where to go find that specific allergen. The way I recommend to do it is everybody has a pest control map available to them. You could actually take that pest control map and map out where your storage is, where your storage of allergens are, and keep that in your allergen program. And now when an auditor comes in and says, where do you store your allergens? You pull out that map, you show him where they could be stored, and then when they go out there for the plant audit, they'll see it and it looks really good. That's one of the major changes. And the other one was that they actually want you to separate your finished product as well that contains allergens. They don't want you, this is probably the biggest difficulty I see when I'm on floor level at manufacturing plants, is because, once it's finished, you're combining all those allergens that you're segregating previously and putting them into one product. And whether it's frozen, whether it's dry, whether it's fresh, it still needs to be segregated and controlled. At least if they're next to each other, that's fine. But as long as you're controlling them, there's not, one allergen on top of a different allergen. And that shows that you're losing control. So one thing an auditor really wants to see is that you're controlling the situation after manufacture into storage. And another way to do this is, as I touched on previously in food fraud, is through your HACCP plan. Darryle mentioned that it's just not micro, physical, and biological anymore. In our HACCP plan, we also use allergen. So it touches on each part I just discussed, which is receiving. How do you control allergens there? Storage, how do you control allergens there? And then you'll find out that you actually have policies and procedures in place, and your employees are trained on those policies and procedures, which then shows that you have control every aspect throughout the process to ensure that you're not going to have any cross-contamination issues. I've been to plants, and I can't mention any names, where the allergen control is non-existent. There's nuts being mixed with non-nut products. It was disturbing. And they were actually using every allergen, but every allergen wasn't in every product. It was all over the place, and they had no grasp on it. We worked with them, several weeks on this, and now they're doing a lot better. But they didn't know any better to make sure that they control it. They were controlling it when it came into their warehouse, but they weren't controlling it during production. That's a big deal. That's where you can actually kill somebody, especially when referring to nuts.
And the number one recall in the world is allergens. And the issue is mainly because of mislabel.
Yes, correct.
And the mislabeled a lot of times is because of either ignorance or which I'm not saying that as a negative term. You just need to know what needs to be on there, and then you can put the stuff in there. Or an alteration of an ingredient or a process that the label has not been altered as well. And so this is a huge thing because people lose so much money over this one issue. And so it's good that SQF is bringing it up because it brings, I think, because it brings to attention the #1 recall.
Yeah, and that also circles back to the fraud I was talking about, Matt. And when this usually happens when you're not familiar with, you don't know your ingredients inside and out. You're not screening your approved suppliers correctly. You're not getting these spec sheets. You're not getting these ingredient statements. And every ingredient has sub-ingredients. Well, majority of them do. And one of the main ones is like something like soy lecithin. I've heard from customers, not customers, but people I've visited that said, well, there's only a little bit. It's not going to hurt anybody. And that's the wrong mentality because soy lecithin is actually a soy allergen. It's noted from the FDA as a soy allergen. And if you have soy lecithin in your product or as a sub-ingredient in your raw materials, it has to be listed on your allergen statement. So you're right. It's not screening your ingredients correctly or using something different that you didn't know that they had some sort of additive in there that was actually an allergen. So now you ship that out without that allergen statement, knowing your sub-ingredients, and that's when people get sick or, that's when you have that recall.
Right. And I see I see a lot of retailers and food service companies and a lot of companies like you out there, processors, that are randomly testing or use this as a protocol to test all lots that come in for allergens. And that's generally where the recalls happen, is from your clients testing the product and then letting you know, hey, you don't have this allergen on the label. We can't sell your product or we can't use your product. And then that's when the recall gets out.
Oh, absolutely. Even, I don't know if you said this, but even competition will go and buy their competition and test it. Whether they're making a GMO statement or an allergen statement, they can send your product, go and buy your product at the store, go and send it to a lab and have it tested. And then they'll report you because you're your competition. And then, that's why you got to make sure there's always people out there looking. There's people out there looking to find issues with labeling so that they can get a lawsuit.
That is that's something I had not heard of, but that makes total sense if somebody would do that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Every day.
All right. Should we move on to the next slide, or do you have more comments on this?
I touched on everything I need to. Darryle, you have anything on that?
No, you did fine.
Okay.
Great.
So the FSMA PCQI, basically this is a requirement as you have to do your regulatory first with SQF. So keep in mind, you have to take the course or you have to have the industry experience, and there's a little bit of clauses to all this. So I don't want to get into the whole PCQI requirements. Matt would be here for a day doing that. So recommend taking the course if you feel you need to do it. But what I wanted to get into, what are the changes that you need to know once you start to do this? The preventative controls are a tricky little thing to do. You've got to step back and look at your HACCP analysis and really ask yourself, do you have it under control? And I think a lot of people make mistakes with HACCP analysis. They just think CCPs are big, and they don't realize a lot of your items could be preventative controls. If you have a CCP, it's really out of control, or the government or your customers told you to have it. You really want to make things preventative controls and basically daily ensuring they're checked and they're validated and your process is under control. I challenge anybody with a HACCP plan with a bunch of spaghetti diagrams and a bunch of CCPs. Did you really understand the exercise? So, we use a nifty software, but everybody has a different way, but Codex is the way that we use it. And we basically do a risk assessment of severity and likelihood. And we ask ourselves with a score, can it kill somebody and is it in control at your facility? So, Matt, I will tell you that the part here that's really tricky is going back to your HACCP analysis and really dialing in that things are under control. Because if they're CCPs, I'm going to challenge somebody to say, why did you make it a CCP? It's out of control. Or the government tells you it is, and you can't get away with that, right? Milk ordinance is what it is. You pasteurize your milk, or you heat your meat to 140 or 165 for chicken, whatever it is. Those are laws. but why else would you have metal or all the other ones and above? You obviously, your process is out of control. So you need to prove that. You need to have a food safety plan. Now, if you're not doing GFSI, that's great. But guess what? FSMA says you have a food safety plan. Well, food safety plan is all your programs around HACCP. So guess what? You're falling into the FSMA role. So Matt, that's the biggest challenge is people that are not doing GFSI. They're getting dragged into that world regardless because FSMA is doing that. So please keep that in mind, and you must have good documentation. I prefer digital. I don't prefer paper because you can lose and burn paper. I've been in a plant. Matt, I think I told you the story once. I went in a facility, and right during my audit, I asked for the paperwork, and the guy was bragging about his filing systems in the racks, and they emptied out all the racks the week prior and threw everything out in dumpsters to get ready for the audit. He had no paperwork for 2 years. So, I asked how good his filing system works now. Be careful with paper and banker boxes. It gets messy and things get lost. You don't want to be in an FDA situation or even an SQF audit and you can't find that paperwork for your CCPs or your PCs. And that's in a nutshell. I don't want to drag it on that one unless there's questions. Are there any questions for me on that one? Or Matt, do you have any questions?
No, I just want to say that each of the standards have their own FSMA modules. And so, and we're actually going to have the standards in webinars as well to discuss this, the modules. But you can go find SQF's module, BRC. I know Primus GFS is adding that to their version 3. Global Gap has a module. So this is where you need to go to the preventative control class. You need to go to if you're an importer, foreign supplier verification rule, all that stuff. But the standards themselves have modules.
Yep.
That are like add-ons to this for anything that you missed. Dale and Rob, have you guys worked much with those modules? And what are some of the big things to think of that just SQF doesn't cover that you need to make sure to look at for preventative controls?
SQF actually covers it. It actually goes over it. So that's what most people are pretty comfortable once they see this. The changes in the analysis itself. So whether you have all the approved supplier programs and all that, you have to have the analysis has to be redone, and that's the challenge. You've got to go back now. And Matt, keep in mind, a lot of people inherited HACCP plans, right? They took a job and they walked into it. It was Swiss cheese. It was terrible. You now have to rebuild it regardless with the PCs. So that is the change that they have to know. You have to go back and redo your analysis.
Now, what about HACCP? I mean, you're talking about HACCP and
HACCP is a dying thing. They've actually moved away from that topic now. That is your PCs.
Right.
Prevention controls is your PCs. That actually got really confusing for a lot of people. So the FDA is really moving towards just the PCQI, and that's what you're seeing now. HACCP is still there, but it's morphed into what we're doing now. The PCQIs. You've got to have your preventative controls outlined in your risk analysis. So if you tell me you're keeping your HACCP plan the way it's been for 20 years, I'm going to tell you it's not going to meet it.
Yeah. Well, because no process has been the same for the last 20 years.
No, and the famous lines is that's the way it always was. Well, I got news for everybody on this call. That's not the way this works. You have to evolve with the changes in the laws and the codes. You have to evolve, and this could take a lot longer, but we picked the pertinent ones we thought were up front and to discuss. But there's a lot of little change in the code that gets tricky. But I encourage you to go read the line change items that's on their website. You can download that for free and just mull it over. But the key is understanding how it really is applicable to your business.
Yeah,
it's fun stuff.
Yeah. All right. So that it content here. Go to the Q&A. But before we go to Q&A, just a quick little shameless for you. We're going to spend about 30 seconds talking about your software before we go to Q&A.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So what we've done is we've taken all 21 programs that you all have to do, and we digitalize them into one software. So whether there's 3 good softwares out there, including ours. Ours is the best. I'm going to tell you that, of course. But there's 3 of them out there. But again, if you can go digital and pull all your systems together, whether it's ours or our competition, Matt, I will tell you the FDA smiles when you're digital and you have everything at their fingertips and you can prove you did it. It's when you can't go back now and make paperwork up. So, keep in mind, FSMA tells you that the government can come in, shut you down, and get paper at the time. They don't need a subpoena anymore. And I was in the produce years ago when you could tell them to go leave. That doesn't happen anymore. People get arrested. So be digitalized, whether us or with somebody. Please look at that option. I think it's worth it. That's all.
Well, thank you so much. I've been doing my little job. Is that the? Yeah. Okay, here. Let's see. Darryle, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Matt.
Okay, great. I have a couple questions here. One question was referring to the allergen. And with that, they were wondering, what does, under the SQF scheme, does the auditor check the country of destination to ensure that we are isolating for those allergens? And then also with that, like a secondary thing is, do different countries have different allergen lists? And if so, do they differ very much?
Yep, good question. So there's a neat list that I have, Matt, and I can give it to you to give anybody that wants this reference. It's allergens across the world. Keep in mind, what you need to know is where you're selling your product. So whether it's an allergen in some of these countries, like the Asian countries, Japan has a million of them. I mean, they've identified sensitivity all over the place. The question I'm going to ask you is, if you bring it into your facility, where are you selling it? So if you're selling to the United States, you need to know those 8 ones that we have. If you're selling to Canada, you need to know sesame, mustard seed, and you need to know the sensitivity ones and sulfites, right? So know your end product. That's the answer I'm going to give you. The company you bought it from should have listed the known allergens. Most likely, they're going to put where they're selling it to, as you will. That's my answer. So you know what I mean? If someone's selling to the U.S., they're going to identify those 8 allergens in their country to bring here. If that makes sense.
That does.
Yep.
All right. That is it. I've been asking a bunch of the questions that they came in to you guys. So that was it for the questions here. Is there anything you want to add before I finish up?
No, the only thing I want to say is please ensure that you look at the code, not just the guidance document. I really steer our clients away from that. You get in the wrong direction and you start doing things that are wacky. So be real cognizant the auditor is going to audit to the code. That's the Bible, not to the guidance document. Keep that in mind.
Very, very good.
It gets the brain going, but keep in mind what you're going to get audited to. I've seen people do stuff off the guidance document, spend a lot of money, and then they get audited and say, "Hey, why did that happen? I told you not to use that document." You can use it to get the brain juice going, but don't do it to do the finalized. Call somebody that knows what they're talking about and do it right.
Right. All right. Well, everybody involved receiving an email with the recorded video. So if there was this or you want to use this as a reference, you can. As you're going through, you're actually able to ask questions again, and I will receive emails of those questions, and we can talk with Darryle and get those answered, or my staff can answer them. I think I talked to Darryle more than my wife. So we have a pretty open.
Nothing wrong with that, man. There's nothing wrong with that. I buy good Christmas gifts. There's nothing wrong with that.
So if there's anything we missed here, guys, or you have any questions later on, please let us know. And we'll keep in touch with you with other webinars that are coming up that are going to be for food safety culture, for SQF. We're also going to have some with technology, so different technologies of software. And if there's any type of webinar that you need information on, any topic of food safety or food compliance in general, please send it over to me, because we're always looking for good topics to cover. And everybody in this industry is starving for information that for some reason people just feel is they want to keep to their chest. And so what we want to get that out to you. Darryle and Rob, thank you guys so much for your time. This presentation was great. I enjoyed the dialogue, and we'll get back with you. Thank you, guys.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
man.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.